Hey everyone, Sam Marilich from Next Venture here, and today we're going to answer the question, is your startup ready to hire for sales? And you might be asking, who is this guy? What do I know? So I've spent the last 8 years in sales recruitment. I worked at a recruiting agency, and then a few years ago I started my own recruiting agency, and the entire time I have hired for software salespeople for early stage B2B companies. So anything from seed through to Series D. I've done a lot of first sales hires. So this is a fairly common conversation that I have with founders. Now, the first thing, right? You might be saying, I don't want to sell. I've got a software product, but I don't want to sell. I'm a founder. I'm a product person. Why do I have to have these sales calls? And the truth is, you might not need to ever have a sales call, right? There are companies out there that will let you sign up and you can start playing with their software immediately. When it comes to paying, you can pull out your credit card and that's about as far as it goes. I am shooting this with a Loom. This is a Gamma document. I pay for both of these products. I pay like $15 a month, I think, for both of them, individually. And I'm obviously not talking to a salesperson to get that transaction through. There are some other examples here: Figma, Zapier, Squarespace, and Canva. They've all taken the product-led growth approach. And these bigger companies, they have all ended up hiring sales teams, but in all of the cases, it happened years down the road. So it wasn't the way that the company grew in the early days. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got companies like IBM or Oracle or SAP, who are extremely famous just for selling very complicated and very expensive solutions. No one is pulling out the credit card to spend $500 a month on an IBM solution. So if we think about this, we've got a spectrum, right? And every company is on this spectrum. And on one end, we've got companies that are primarily selling things through marketing, and then we've got other companies where everything is sold via a salesperson. So the two examples I always like to think about with this, because they both have large marketing teams and also sales teams, is Coca-Cola and Oracle, right? So we're going to use Oracle as another example, but we're all familiar with Coca-Cola. They actually have a massive sales team, but the reason you and I buy it is because we see the advertising everywhere. They spend billions and billions of dollars per year, and that's how their primary distribution method kind of happens. And then on the other end, we've got Oracle. They spend a lot of money on marketing. If you follow Formula One, they sponsor Red Bull, they sponsor sailing, they sponsor a lot of stuff, as a way to get their brand out there. If you're in San Francisco, they've sponsored the baseball stadium, but no one is pulling out their credit card to buy an Oracle solution. You are getting cold called. You are interacting via email with the Oracle sales reps. They are flying out to meet with you, and you are going to spend a lot of money if you implement their kind of solution. So, we can go on LinkedIn and we find these pundits talking about, in the future, there will not be salespeople. Buyers are going to do their own research, and then they're going to select from a vast array of commoditized buyers. Every year or so, we get a new name for this phenomenon. And of course, our pundit on LinkedIn, who's offering these predictions, can help you move into the new paradigm. There won't be any salespeople in the future. You'll have to learn from me. It's kind of a genius move when you think about it. The reality is there is an apex predator. There is a killer out there for sales jobs. It's the buy now button. It looks a little bit like this. You can use it to buy flights. So instead of going through a travel agent, you just go on United or American or your flight website of choice. You can use it to buy a new computer. I bought a new laptop recently, and what did I do? I bought it online. It arrived pretty quickly after that. And if you're a startup, you are probably using it to buy compute power from AWS or Microsoft or Google. And again, right, you're just able to sign up with a credit card and really get started. The big thing here is that every year, customers are a little bit more comfortable spending more money with the click of the mouse. So it's just like on an eternal march upwards, right? Tesla was the first company to do away with car dealerships. That's a pretty new paradigm in terms of people being comfortable not buying something through a salesperson. But this is not a new phenomenon, right? So read a sales book from 100 years ago, like the 1920s, the 1930s, really when a lot of professional selling was invented. You had people and they were going door to door selling insurance. There were families that were supported by people selling shoes on commission at Macy's. People used to make a living selling magazine subscriptions, right? All of these roles have been eaten by the buy button. So salespeople have either been replaced by technology or minimum wage order takers, right? If you think about shoes, how much money do you have to spend on a pair of shoes to have a competent salesperson? You're probably spending like $700 on some Louis Vuitton shoes before you even really start interacting with someone who's more of a salesperson than a like minimum wage shop assistant. So, if we think about enterprise sales versus retail sales, well, one thing we don't, I think, take enough into account is that enterprise sales has a lot more in common with project management than it does with your last trip to the dealership for a new car. So this is driven by buyer behavior, not by seller behavior. So if we take Salesforce as an example, Salesforce made $31.52 billion in 2023. And they spent $13.5 billion of that on sales and marketing. And because Salesforce is a B2B company, the majority of that was in sales as opposed to marketing. So, that's a lot of headcount, it's a lot of managerial complexity. And just for comparison, Salesforce only spent $7.5 billion on operations and research and development, so engineering and legal and HR and all of those other departments in the company. If customers would just self-checkout, if they would just use the buy button, they could very aggressively cut costs. And, if you think about you're a CFO, you want to improve your margins, you want to keep Wall Street really happy, how good would that be, right? You would be able to massively, massively improve your profit margins. But B2B salespeople need to exist because the customers don't want to self-checkout. I think this is something that people don't understand. Part of the reason that salespeople exist in a B2B context is because companies need internal barriers to stop people from buying things, right? So this world where buyers are fully empowered to do whatever they want, it sounds really good from a consultant point of view, but put yourself in like the shoes of any Fortune 500 company. It's an absolute nightmare. You need these barriers. You need, the finance department to kind of keep a rein on budgets. You need legal, ensuring that, liability isn't out of control. You want IT, to make sure that you're like not exposing yourself to massive cyber risk and so on and so forth. So you end up just needing people. We find ourselves in this situation where we're selling a product for more than $500 a month or $6,000 a year. And that is more or less like the lower limit at which a real human needs to be in the loop as part of the buying conversation. There comes a point, not at 6,000, but maybe a bit more, where sending any sort of contract means legal have to review it, and they might need to do some redlining. IT will want to do a security review at a certain point. If you've got thousands of people who are going to be using this software day by day, then they need to be trained. So you need someone on your side of things who can coordinate all of this and just make sure that the process goes smoothly. Here's our person that they thought they were going to do product-led growth. They thought they were going to outsource everything, and then they decided to go up market. But we've got all of these other issues. This is not as passive as I thought. And then we get into a world of account expansion. So just imagine, you've got a happy paying customer who just so happens to work at a 150,000 person Fortune 500 company. Now, they might be spending $200 a month meeting the needs of their team, and that's great. You're getting $2,400 a year, but what if you could get 100 times that much? Wouldn't it be really good if you had someone who could help your buyer, your internal champion, navigate their own internal organization to help work out how that could happen, right? So features aren't enough. You need distribution if you're going to compete. And, I love this graph just as an example. This is Slack, and then this is Microsoft Teams. Slack was around for a few years before Microsoft Teams was invented, but Microsoft Teams got bundled in with Microsoft Office, and you can kind of see the power of distribution in a single graph. And then while we're thinking about all of the things that we could do for our sales engine, well, why don't we add a little bit of a punch? Yes, we can have leads come to us passively via SEO and content and spending a bit of money on ads. But what if we just went direct as well? What if we did some research on who our customers are and we introduced ourselves maybe over the phone or over cold email? A lot of multi-million dollar deals have started off with something as simple as a cold call. So we end up in a world where we do need a sales team, like all of the other B2B companies. So if we loop back to the example of AWS that I started with, they will let you start with a credit card, but they have a sales team of more than 60,000 people. That is not AWS total. That is just the AWS sales team, right? So if you start spending a bit more money, you will get introduced to your dedicated account manager. I like this from the Matrix. We're not like all of the other companies where, Now you might be saying to me, I don't know how to sell. But the reality is, being the CEO is a sales role. You are selling yourself to customers, to employees, and to investors. That is the role forever. If you feel awkward at the idea of trying to sell, just remember, this is the best way to ensure that you are building something that people want. You are trying to get customers, right? Now, if you think about it, salespeople are just, sales is just talking to your customers. You don't have to lie to people. You don't have to put people under pressure. And you don't have to handle every single objection. If someone's a bad fit, that's okay. You can just not sell to them. There are lots of customers out there in the world. And you've also got another advantage, which is if you're the CEO or you're a founder, you are playing with a massive advantage. You actually don't need to be as good at raw selling as the salespeople you hire. A founder is always more interesting to prospects than yet another salesman. So you can learn to sell. I've worked with a lot of technical founders over the years, and it's pretty fun watching the evolution as they go from being sales skeptics to champions of the sales team. So you today, I don't know how to sell. You in the near future, wow, we're making so much money. Money machine go brrr. So the harsh reality, right? If we go back to this initial start where, hey, maybe I'm not gonna ever take a sales call. Well, the problem with that is a lot of SaaS companies are selling solutions in search of the problem. So you need to be doing the initial sales calls. You need to work out the objections that the market has to what you're selling. And something I always talk to candidates about before they join a company is, if it were your own corporate budget, would you buy the product? I mean, you don't have to do this, right? You could join these people. I feel like giving up. I'm thinking about quitting. I've spent a whole lot of time building an app. I don't know how to get users. I hate talking to customers, right? Unfortunately, that is actually the job. You might be asking, at what point do I bring on a salesperson? And the big negative about sales is it's pretty time intensive. It doesn't scale as well as engineering does. WhatsApp, they were able to get to 900 million users with 50 engineers, but you're going to need a lot more than 50 salespeople to get to 900 million in annual revenue. And so you need to build a sales team at a relatively early stage, which brings the question, how early? So I've got 2 rules of thumb for you. The first one is that you need to close 20 customers, or you need to get to 500K in ARR by yourself. Now, don't get cute and pretend that the customers who are spending $199 a month count towards your first 20 clients, because you're only diluting yourself here. You need to be in the ballpark of 500K in ARR. If you're at 430K, that's fine, but if you're at 200, you need to do a bit more selling, right? So you need to be in the ballpark of 500K before hiring salespeople makes sense, because this all gets back to the point of you, right? It's highlighted for a reason. You, the founder, being the one who will get on the early sales calls, because you will be learning the objections that customers have. And guess what? That helps you with your marketing. And you will be getting insight into what the customers want built. So this will help you with your product. It's all part of a very virtuous flywheel. You make more money. You also learn things that help the marketing get better. And then you also learn things that help the product get better, which makes it easy to sell to get more money, right? And so it starts working for us. Now, if you don't want to do these things, you may as well quit and go and work for a megacorp, because this is strategy. This is the work. Everything else is just playing business. Now, if you have 20 customers who each spend an average of 20K a year, you're at 400K in ARR, you are getting close to the point where making a sales hire is a sensible next step. Do we bring on a salesperson? And then the question is, are you at 500K or more in ARR? Yes. Hire someone? No, not yet. Now, you might be thinking, our sales cycle is long and we deal with enterprise. No. Very dangerous belief. Most startup sales advice assumes a company trajectory that starts with small deals and grows over time. And this is pretty common for how startups actually go to market. So most startup sales advice assumes a company trajectory that starts with small deals and grows over time. And this is pretty common for how startups actually go to market. As your product matures and you build out your organization, you're able to sell larger and more complicated deals to bigger corporations. But there are exceptions to the rule. Sometimes a small deal might start in the six-figure range, or you deal with a sector where deals might not be big, but the sales cycle is really long. So you're just selling it to education or government or non-profits. If this is you, you do not have a get out of jail free card. You still have to get the first few customers yourself. But if your deal size is large, you might be okay to get a salesperson onto your team, even though you've only closed 5 to 6 customers, right? If you've got 4 customers and they're each paying you 110 grand, yeah, you probably can afford to bring on a salesperson, just because your deal sizes your deal sizes are a lot larger than most comparable startups. Then we've got another trap here. I call it the enterprise innovation trap. This is where startups manage to sign very big brands, but it's because they're selling something very trendy. To pull an example out of a hat, I found this. BMW a few years ago announced a program about how they plan to use blockchain. You can find this for like any large corporation and any passing trend. Chatbots, like Web3, blockchain. There's always a new one, right? Every single year. And the question is, like, did the startup sell a $50,000 pilot? Probably. Will this convert into a 7 or 8 figure deal? In almost every case, no. So this is the danger of selling to the enterprise, but actually selling into the innovation department or something similar. And I want you to think about this. If Walmart did 100 pilots at $50,000 each per year per pilot, they would have spent $5 million. That is not enough money for them to buy lunch for the 2 million employees that they have, right? It is such a drop in the bucket for these, for these companies. So the benefit of selling into SMB and mid-market segments are that you actually need to be good enough and kind of like relevant enough that you solve a problem with real business impact on day one. Now, sales, it's binary, right? A deal is not half closed. It's either closed or it isn't. And closed is the operative word in this situation. If you are talking to big companies but haven't brought in any revenue, you are not ready for a salesperson. It's similar to closing a round of funding, and it's similar to making a key hire. There is a binary outcome. The funding is either raised and the wire was sent, or it isn't. The offer is either accepted or it wasn't, right? So there are only 2 real outcomes here. You close the deal, $0, or you close the deal, $, right? And this is part of the accountability that comes with being in sales. If you're a founder, you've got years to figure out product market fit. Salespeople get performance managed out after a few bad quarters, and they've got a quota that they need to hit. This has a direct correlation to how much they personally take home. Good salespeople, they recognize this reality, and good salespeople also have the option to work at startups or companies where product market fit has already been established. In 99% of cases, the salesperson who will join a company with no revenue is not the sort of salesperson you want to hire. Now, there is like a 1% exception, and these people go on and do really well. If you have sold your previous company for $1 billion, yes, fine, congratulations, you are the exception. But if you're watching this, it's probably not you. And this is from Glenn Ross. It's like a very classic sales movie. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it over the weekend. So let's get into understanding sales compensation. Now, here's a standard compensation plan for someone in technology sales. So base salary, 50%, and then we've got variable compensation, that's another 50%. That gives us an OTE, or on-target earnings. Normally, we multiply the OTE by 4 to 5x to find a salesperson's quota. So let's imagine that we've got a salesperson with an OTE of 250K. They're at an early stage startup, so we'll give the OTE a 4x multiple, which means this person has $1 million quota, which means that they have a base salary of 125K and a variable component of 125K. Now, if they only sell $600,000 in the first year, they will make 125K from their base salary and 75K from the variable compensation. So despite their OTE being 250, they've taken home 200K. Now, they may be looking for a new job, either because you're firing them or because, they're like, this is not enough money, I need to go somewhere else. But let's take a different scenario here. If the same salesperson sells $1.2 million in the first year, they'll get 125K from their base salary, and then they'll get 150K from their variable compensation, and maybe even more if their organization offers accelerators once quota is hit. So they're making 275K total. And they're probably telling recruiters, hey, I'm not interested. I've got a really good thing going. So salespeople, they're broadly segmented by the deal sizes that they sell. The bigger the deal, the higher the quota and OTE tends to be. So this is a bit of a general rule of thumb. So if we start with SMB salespeople, they often have a deal size between 5 to 30K. They've got an OTE of anywhere between 140 and 180K, and then a quota of 480 to 720K. Mid-market reps usually have a deal size of 30 to 80K. I would say they are usually doing a lot of $50,000 deals. They've got an OTE of 180K on the low end to 240K on the high end. That's a quota of 720 to 940K. Then we've got enterprise AEs. Their deal sizes 80K to 150K plus. The OTE is usually 250 to 300K, and that's on a quota of $1 million to $1.2 million. And people tend to want to hire reps who have done $100,000, as their largest deal, or a few of those at this point. And then we've finally got our strategic account executives, sometimes called like a major account executive. Now they're doing deals in the hundreds of thousands of dollar range. So their OTE, it's usually 300 to 350. Their quota is usually $1.2 million or more. And this is the rep who's doing the multi-$100,000, multi-million-dollar deals, right? These are your true, fabled enterprise salespeople. Now, don't be stupid. If you are stupid and you would like to repel good salespeople, you'll have capped commissions. Most organizations aren't stupid, so they don't cap commissions. This is, our 25 IQ Wojak. He could save a lot of money if he capped sales commissions. Now, salespeople are not entrepreneurs. They're often thought of being quite risk tolerant, and I suspect this is because of A, the variable nature of commission, and then B, the fact that almost every great entrepreneur is a master salesperson. Now, the first point is very true when we look at sales roles that are full commission, real estate sales, for example. The problem with being a real estate agent is that most of them make next to nothing. The median income for real estate agents is $48K per year, which is $12,000 or 20% less than the average for all Americans. Now, this is further skewed by the fact that the top 1 to 2% of real estate agents make almost all of the money. Wealth distribution is a lot less extreme in software sales, and there are many examples of financially savvy reps who live on their base salaries, who then go on to save and invest their commissions. And to that second point, entrepreneurs often sit a few standard deviations out on the financial risk curve compared to the average person. The average salesperson does not. So if we think about a population distribution graph, over here, we've got our government employees. In the middle, we've got the average person. Then slightly out, we've got people that join early stage startups. And then a bit further out again, we've got founders. Now, another distinction that is worth talking about is engineers are often motivated to solve really hard problems. This is not true for salespeople. Selling a product that no one wants is playing life on hard mode, and most salespeople have been burnt at some point by an offer that is too good to be true. It's really hard on your self-esteem. It's also bad for your bank balance. So one of the cruel ironies of selling is that the easier the product is to sell, the easier it is for you to hire really good salespeople. Now, there is a balance to this. There are some products that more or less sell themselves. So like Google Ads or LinkedIn Sales Navigator both come to mind for this, because the common objection, like the only objection I can really think about is, well, who else are you realistically going to use? So the sales reps at these organizations, they don't tend to do particularly well at startups. And we'll cover that balance. We'll cover this balance a little bit later as we talk about the sort of profiles to look for and where you can find these great salespeople. And like as an example of a really good like piece of technology, but horrific for sales, is the Apple Vision Pro, right? Like, did the engineers do an amazing like amount of work to create this technology? Yes, undoubtedly, like good work, but it's a total flop, and it would have flopped significantly harder if they didn't have literally like the world's best consumer brand pushing this, right? With like insane distribution, with insane marketing, but yeah, it's still a flop, right? So you might be thinking, well, we've closed our first 500K, we're ready to hire a salesperson. Should we hire an SDR or an account executive? Before we do that, like, let's just define these two terms, especially if you haven't heard these before. So an SDR is sometimes called an account development representative or a business development representative, and that's someone whose job is to set meetings with qualified prospects. And then account executive is someone who is responsible for managing the entire sales process from end to end. So if we think about like the sales process, we've got to talk to people, reach out to them for the first time. We've got to have a discovery call where we, oh, thank you, yep, thumbs up. We've got to have a discovery call where we, kind of work out like, does the prospect actually have a problem? We need to show the prospect, the software and what it might look like for their use case. Then we need to talk through with the various stakeholders to get the deal across the line, and then we need to close the deal. So an SDR, they're in charge of more or less like booking meetings and sometimes qualifying prospects, whereas an account executive really does all of it. Now, SDRs are useful, I would say, for two reasons. The first one is to book meetings, and the second one is to exist as a future talent pipeline for your sales team. This becomes very important as your sales team grows in size, but it's not a problem yet. So, just to give you some numbers, the cost of an SDR, 60K in base, 20K in variable. So they're not on a 50-50 split. It's usually like 70-30, 80-20, 75-25. So, but it's significantly higher on base and much lower on variable. Now, there's a recruiting cost associated whether you use an agency or not. There's health insurance and payroll taxes. There are tools, laptop, phone, software, and then office space. So you're in it for about 123 grand. Now, what are you getting for your money with SDRs? Well, let's assume that you set a quota of 12 meetings per month and you have a 2-month ramp quota. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to assume that the SDR books 0 meetings during their ramp, and at the 1-year mark, you're planning on promoting your SDRs into being account executives. Now, we're going to assume this SDR has hit quota 100% every month after they come off their ramp. And, over the course of the year, you, the business, have received 120 meetings. So each meeting has cost you a little over $1,000, and these meetings may or may not have contributed to any deals closing. The additional bad news is the real world cost to actually hire an SDR is higher than my numbers because I didn't add in any sort of management. Now, an SDR manager costs upwards of $160,000 per year, which is spread across 4+ SDRs, which brings your individual SDR cost, like fully loaded, to about 165K or more. SDRs require much more management than account executives because the tools that they use are just dealing with so much data. And then the fact is, like, they're just more junior in their career, so they need a little bit more training and closer management. Now let's talk about the cost of an account executive. Now, we've got a base salary of 100K. We're going for a mid-market rep here. We've got variable compensation of 100K. I will talk to you about that in a moment. The recruiting cost is a little bit higher. We've got health insurance and payroll taxes slightly higher just to reflect the higher base salary. The tools are the same, and then also the office space is the same, but our total cost is only 180K. Now, if you're sharp with math, you may notice that the cost in black are only 155K, but the total here is 180K. That is because you are paying 25K in variable compensation as the ramp for the first 3 months that this AE is working for you, regardless of performance. So there are 2 key points I want you to remember here. Is the first one, most of these expenses aren't that flexible. You might be able to trim this number by 5 to 10%, but you aren't cutting either of these numbers, either of these costs to hire by 50%. The thing about an account executive is that you're getting much more for your money. So we're going to assume that this rep has a 3-month ramp where they're expected to close nothing. That's where we get that 25K in variable that we are definitely paying out. But then we're going to give this person a full quota for the remaining 3 quarters. We're going to give them a standard 1-to-4 OTE to quota ratio, which means if we're paying this rep 200 grand a year, we expect them to bring in 800K. So following this logic, our account executive, we're going to assume that they had 100% to plan, just like our SDR. They have cost us 280K all in, but they have given us 600K in net new revenue. We also need to think about our cash flow here. Our variable compensation for an account executive is only paid out once the new revenue has been booked, and often after it's been collected from the customer. By comparison, SDR compensation is not explicitly tied to new revenue coming in. So because of this, it almost always makes sense to hire your first 2 and maybe even your first 4 account executives before you start thinking about adding SDRs. The bottom line is, an account executive is the person you want to hire. The upfront cost is about 30% more than an SDR, but they're just a lot more effective, right? So if we look at this, we get a whole lot of qualified calls. If we look at this, we should get a whole lot of money. Now let's just talk through like some common sales careers. We've got SDRs, like that's the building block. That's where most people start. People go into SDR management, but a lot of people, like I would say the common path is account executive, the account executive role. And then the way I would think about this, like if you want to translate this into an engineering kind of context, the director of sales, VP of sales, CRO, that is the management track. This is the individual contributor track. So, account executive, mid-market account executive, enterprise account executive, and then it kind of tops out at strategic account executive. Now, we've already talked a little bit about this, so I'm not going to go back over it. Let's talk a bit about what the ideal first rep looks like for most companies. So in about 80% of cases, the ideal first rep is a mid-market rep. They're a lot more experienced than an SDR, so they don't require as much management, which is really good because you're probably crazy busy. They can also work deals with relatively high velocity. We're not waiting 12 months for these like big enterprise deals to close while paying out the nose for an enterprise AE. And they don't break the bank when it comes to paying them. So our ideal, first rep, 2 to 4 years of sales experience, OTE of 180 to 220K, comfortable closing deals of 30 to 50K. They're comfortable doing their own outbound, and they have a track record of hitting quota. Now you might be thinking, well, we're really excited about this candidate who is crushing it at Egacorp. There are 3 enormous downsides to hiring salespeople from large companies. Number 1, they are used to selling with a massive brand behind them. Number 2, they are expensive. Number 3, they are risk averse. Now, the way I think about it, there are 2 types of B2B organizations. So you can put all of the advice you see about sales into one of 2 buckets, right? We've got enterprise sales organizations with enough money to sponsor F1 teams. They have large billboards in international airports. Oracle, if you look closely, Citrix here, and then there is everyone else. Now there are trade-offs, right? If you're an individual contributor or a sales leader at these bigger companies, if you're calling from Workday or Cloudflare, you are calling as a somewhat known entity. And this is not like a moral or a skill judgment. The candidate that you love who's crushing their number at Salesforce is probably very competent. It's just that they have a skill set that's not relevant for your company stage right now. As a sales rep working at a large organization, you're making a trade. You get a big brand on your resume. You get the stability of a large organization, but you're going to spend a lot longer working your way up the corporate ladder. It's not uncommon to see someone spend 3 years as an SDR at a large organization. So by the time you get to the point where you've been at a big company and you're closing big deals, you're probably 8 to 10 years into your career, which brings us two additional problems. You're probably being paid quite well at this point, and you've spent the last 8 years climbing a corporate ladder. So you end up being very expensive, and you end up having kind of practiced being risk averse for your entire career. Now, screening for risk aversion is a crucial element of hiring for early sales reps, and it's one that we're going to cover in more detail. So, let's use inversion thinking to find the right candidate. Let's start by inverting. What are the traits we don't want to hire for? What traits would we look for if we wanted to maximize the chances of our first hire ending in failure? Take a moment, pause the video, think of a few examples for yourself. Here are 10 that I have thought of. So, number one, someone who needs a lot of structure and doesn't like any deviation from a process. Someone who values stability over everything else. Someone who wants to be told what to do. Someone who doesn't want to work very hard. Someone who doesn't want to be involved in the whole sales process. Someone who isn't comfortable with outbound. Someone who doesn't want to create systems. Someone who isn't confident in their ability to do the job. Someone who wants to work at a bigger company. And then someone who isn't very personally ambitious. Now, as you grow, most of these things become non-issues, right? We can bring in the people that want structure. We can bring in the people that value stability. We can bring in the people who don't want to create systems. But some of these issues will be non-negotiable forever. So if we're thinking about early stage sales, really, we've got three key pillars that we're looking for here. We want someone who's comfortable with iteration. We want someone who's comfortable with ambiguity. And we want someone who is team orientated. So number one, being comfortable with iteration. Selling at early stages involves a lot of iteration. So even though you've closed $500K in revenue, you are probably still working out product market fit. The wrong candidate is someone who needs a talk track and training on how to sell the product. Now, an important note, if we had a sales team of 50 people, this person might be perfect for us. I want you to picture in your mind the sort of person who would rise through the ranks of Oracle's sales organization today very quickly. Do you think that's the sort of person who asked for forgiveness rather than permission? Do you think it's someone who was there running 100 experiments over a 3-year period in order to find perfect message market fit? I doubt it. That sort of behavior, I think, would get you fired so fast your head would spin. Big companies have processes, and that's great. You'll get there too as your company scales, but right now we are focused on building something that can eventually scale, right? We're just not there yet. The second one, being comfortable with ambiguity. So a lot of candidates have been burnt over the last few years with the promises of startup riches. Savvy candidates are asking questions like, what was your team's performance last year? What's your win rate? And so on. These are all good questions, but they are questions that you just don't have the data for yet. Now, if you spend much time on LinkedIn in the sales space, you'll often hear RepView being mentioned. It's a great site. It's like Glassdoor, but for sales teams. But you probably aren't big enough to be on RepView. You don't have a sales team yet. Again, we're looking for a balance here. A candidate who doesn't ask any questions and who isn't showing any level of skepticism isn't someone that you want to hire. This is why you need to have closed sales before. That way, you can answer specific questions. If you ever played Age of Empires, there's like the first age, the Dark Age. We're like 2 minutes into the game, right? Actually, less than 2 minutes into the game here. You don't want someone who expects to come in 3 hours into the game. Now, the third thing, right? It's the teamwork. It's the teamwork orientation. You should be working together to solve the problem. The way to think about this, you're trying to solve a problem. For example, you're trying to go from 500K in ARR to $2 million in ARR in the next 18 months. The right candidate is asking critical questions that helps them solve a similar but slightly different problem. They're trying to work out, how do I personally close 800K in the next 12 months? Oh, I know I need to bring in, 3x the pipeline. So how do I generate $2.4 million in pipeline? Talking through this process with the candidate, it should feel collaborative. You should be working together. Now, this is something I'm pretty strong on, I'm a big believer on, is that I don't think you should sell sales reps on being early stage hires. Founders, they often worry that they're going to make a mishire and accidentally bring on someone who wants to work at a big company. 9 times out of 10, you'll get on a call and one of two things will happen. The candidate will tell you how excited they are to work at an early stage company, how they want to build processes, how they want to be on a founding team. Often they'll mention, one day I want to start my own business, or after this I want to start my own business. It's not uncommon that this person has been at a startup before that's grown from like 20 people to 800 people during their tenure, but they miss the early stage work and camaraderie. They like being able to talk directly to the CEO. They don't like the bureaucracy, the management, etc. The second kind of candidate asks all sorts of questions about quota attainment across the team, what their territory would look like, what sort of resources they'd have. They want to see proof that they can do well. What's the training? What's the partnerships? Conventional sales wisdom would be that you should just handle all of the objections of the second candidate. I think that's wrong. I think all of the questions that the second candidate has are legitimate, but they're also disqualifying. This is not the sort of candidate you want to hire as an early member of your team. One thing I always look for when I'm running a search is interest in stage of company. So the candidate who's looking for an organization with a history of success isn't the right person to be your first sales hire. However, by the time you become a Series B organization and have a sales team of 15 who are all crushing quota, it's a great time to add this sort of person to your team. Great sales advice often pushes for next steps or a no. There's no point, in my view, wasting weeks and months on maybes. You're much better getting out there, looking for people who really want and need what you're trying to sell. So in the same vein, polarization when it comes to recruiting people is your friend. You want to polarize early and polarize often. This is another reason I'm such an advocate of an outbound recruiting strategy, because you're going after the exact candidates that you want to hire. You can always find more of them, and you're just not at the mercy of whoever stumbles across your job posting and then applies. If you've seen The Wolf of Wall Street, we are not trying to be like the Wolf of Wall Street, right? So we get to this argument about hiring two. This is originally Jason Lemkin's argument from SaaStr. If you're not following SaaStr, you should start doing that. The thing about what you're doing right now is that you're running an A/B test. If you only hire one rep and they do well, you don't know why. If you only hire one rep and they do poorly, you don't know why. Now, there's a third outcome that you want to avoid, which is when a rep is just doing okay. Now, I want you to imagine that you hired a mid-market rep on an 800K quota 18 months ago. They're at a 200K OTE, they're going to do 500K in their second year, and at the end of the year, they're at 62% to plan. This person, they fit in well with the team. There's a really good argument for keeping them around and not putting them on a PIP. They're paying for themselves. And you can delude yourself into thinking that the 500K they're bringing in dramatically increases your exit value. But it doesn't. You're creating a culture of complacency. And tech companies that aren't dramatically growing their revenue year over year don't get good multiples at all. You need the sales team performing, and you need a little bit of pressure. So the problem with hiring one sales rep to start, we've got our first account executive, high performance, we don't know how to replicate it. Middling performance, we create a culture of complacency, or poor performance. It's hard to know why this person did poorly. This is the reason that sales teams love to hire ex-D1 athletes. Friendly competition, it's just so essential in sales. Camaraderie makes slogging through the rejections easier. It makes it so much easier to pick up the phone, make the additional cold call. Done well, this is all positive sum. And remember, this wider game outside of your company, it's zero sum. If you and your team don't go out and find the revenue, someone else is getting the money. There's a good chance that money goes to your competitor, who gets the ARR, the logo, the case study, and the multiple improvement. So, some next steps. If you want to book some time to speak with me, there will be a link below. If you would like this document sent to you, there will be a link below for that, or click up here and you can watch another one of my videos. I will see you soon. Cheers.